if then the participants in how they run DBT use different client configurations within a cluster, then you also help centralization from a software perspective. That's something that requires a lot of coordination, and it's something that in simple DBT, like Lido contributors help with. So we get all the participants together and we're like, okay, what clients are you going to run? What clients are you going to run? To make sure that, for example, there isn't a critical threshold of the same client combination. And then there's also, of course, like other centralization risks, which is one protocol, for example, perhaps having like too much ETH in it in terms of like the share of other ETH. And that's largely been the argument that has been levied against Lido in the past. I think it's a good concern, it's a valid risk, but it's not enough to only think about it in terms of like, there's a certain percentage point after which things become problematic, because not all protocols are the same, right? So like, if you're thinking that it's best to spread like stake across, let's say 5 protocols and they each have 20%, that's kind of weird, because the only thing that you're thinking of right there is like what number sounds good, and you're not thinking of like what is the risk profile of each protocol, how good is their code, how paranoid are they about security, do they go after like every DeFi opportunity that comes up and like market on Twitter for yield and things like that. And then the last aspect, kind of like around centralization, is how open is the protocol for other people to use it, right? So the great thing about STETH is that anybody could stake at the beginning. However, not anybody could run a node. And so with CSM, anybody and everybody would be able to run a node and participate in staking on Ethereum, almost like you would as a node operator, without having to have the 32 ETH. Now, from your perspective as a node operator, you probably won't like that a little bit either, because again, you'll have to share the same size of pie with more people. I think the reality there is that like you will never be able to have I don't know, like let's say 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 independent node operators, right, solo stakers. And they will very, very unlikely be able to run hundreds, or like definitely not thousands of validators, right, because there's not enough capital, and it's too capital inefficient from a bonding perspective to be able to do something like that. So the natural kind of end game is for professional node operators to be running the lion's share of the network. But increasing the participation of independent node operators drastically helps, because they are like the bulwark when it comes to things like regulatory overreach, censorship resistance, and things like that. So if you can rely on a relatively fat, long tail of independent node operators for things like censorship resistance, and the ethos of the network, then you can rely on the professional node operators to keep the network running well and functioning.
Same here. I mean, I think that's kind of a good conclusion of what John wanted to pass. And at the same time, I'm actually not sure about one point though, because you mentioned insurance. Just want to kind of think deeper in there. I think when it comes to insurance, you have to have like one single entity to kind of like provide insurance, right? Otherwise, we could just go back to like when how insurance was born, where every participant kind of like pitched into the same pool, and then when anything that catastrophically happens, we just kind of pay out from that pool. I think if we have to do it in a decentralized way, that possibly would have to be the way, but there are no research from it so far. But I think that's a really solid and good point, especially when as you said, when there are large institutions, large sum of ETH coming in. I don't think any single provider can kind of cover the whole state ETF. So that has to be done. But we probably want to look into this after this talk. That's all.
If I can just add something, I think part of the complication there is due to basically how the Ethereum staking penalty dynamics work, right? So it's very difficult to ensure validators because of the potential maximum downside. And the potential maximum downside is something that is completely just governed by the consensus rules of Ethereum. I'm not saying that they should change necessarily. I just think that this is the thing that makes it very, very difficult to find a sane price equilibrium for purchasing staking insurance. So if you look at a lot of liquid staking solutions that offer insurance, there's fine print that basically says they'll insure the first 2 ETH of each validator up to a certain amount or something like that, right? It's basically impossible to insure the full amount of a validator against a mass lashing event, especially because you're not necessarily able to attribute the cause there, right? So if there's some sort of catastrophic client bug, which is why we do things with decentralization and that client diversity to avoid and mitigate the potential likelihood of things like that happening. But if something like that happens, then there's not enough ETH in the world in general to be able to create a policy that would cover that kind of event.
100%, we totally agree with them. I think in order to build on this, because obviously this is one path to take, full coverage of insurance is obviously the easiest path to take, but the hardest to achieve. And at the same time, you also mentioned about having more clients, client diversification, more different people, entities to run the same thing. So I guess this would lead back to CSM, right? How do you see CSM along with DVT and solo stakers?
Yeah, so the primary purpose of CSM, I guess, as a module to Lido, is to enfranchise independent node operators or solo stakers into the protocol. So up until now, it's been a protocol mostly for professional node organizations. That changed with Simple DVT, but with CSM, I mean, I'm already running validators on CSM. I was also running solo validators before, but anybody, if you have 2 ETH on testnet, you can go and you can set up a CSM validator. You can run it any way that you want, and if you want to run DVT on top of it, you can. The cool thing about CSM is that, yes, there's a bond, but basically the rewards that you get are multiplied because there's a lot of delegated capital that you also get rewards on. So you put in 2 ETH, that ETH gets transformed into STETH, and so you get normal staking rewards, and then you get 7% on testnet. These numbers will probably change when the DApp does the vote for mainnet, but you get 7% of rewards on the delegated capital. That's more than you would get, for example, in the curated set. So there's actually an incentive for node operators like P2P and A41 to go to CSM and run nodes, right? And we think it's very, very likely that once CSM becomes fully permissionless, professional node operators will also use it because they get better rewards on their ETH. And it's also a way for them to actually start chasing capital now. So previously in the curated set, the Lido network basically provided all of the cost of acquisition for capital because you just delegate stake to operators. But now operators will need some form of bond, so they might get that from investors or fund allocators or something like that. Now, given that we think that it's pretty lucrative for professional node operators to use CSM, how do we protect, if you want to think about it that way, solo stakers? There's going to be an early access period. We don't know exactly how long it'll be, but probably on the order of a few months, whereby if you participated in CSM on testnet or you were a proven solo staker, you will be able to access CSM before the gates open. And we see kind of how the market decides and how many node operators are going to participate and things like that. CSM will work similar to Simple DVT in that it'll start with a smaller target share. But we think that CSM can turn into a really, really sustainable module. So it might go to 10%, it might go to 15%, there might be some protocol economic changes necessary for that to happen because obviously if the curated set is paying node operators 5% and CSM 7%, that doesn't work, that'll also impact margins. But there's going to be some community discussion around figuring out how to make that more appealing.
100%. I mean, the CSM thing is definitely something for, it's very good for solo stakers, especially for the ones that we spoke with. So looking forward to that. That is very interesting. And I also wanted to understand more. Obviously, you also mentioned about how DVT and CSM can actually be very good for node operators. At the same time, you guys did not really advertise it this way, right? We have basically mentioned Lido SSV. I think if not even Lido DVT, right? And at the same time, A41, have you guys been advertising DVT to your clients, or if you guys have how would you kind of communicate a message to them?
I know it's being recorded right now, so. Okay. Disclaimer here, I think we are a investor to Google, and we have close ties with the Cisco team. I don't know if I should just call it TS or Cisco. Because we do have, okay, so I think we're a little different in terms of how we approached the idea of DVT from the get-go, from players like P2P. There are multiple assumptions that goes into it. Well, the first assumption is that when we first started off, we were like, hey, in order to get to players like P2P level, we have to try something new, right? And as a newbie validator who was applying to Lido at the time, in order to become a curated node operator, there were not that many differentiators that we could have. So we intentionally chose, I'm sorry, we intentionally chose diversity of clients as one of our tools, adding on top of our geographical uniqueness. And we also added like early phase participants of every DBT testnets as one of our tools as well. So on that end, were we advertising DBT to our clients? Not really, but we were intentionally using it in order to get to the center of gravity of the space, right? That is more realistic and very honest answer. But would we be using it as advertisement for potential clients or future clients? Could be yes. There's an episode that I had with Brad from Mobile. We were talking about it, and also I think Gauntlet was part of the discussion as well. We were talking about how, like, I think it was a private dinner at one of the events that we were throwing at ECC or whatever, or Texas or MCAP. We talked about like potentially how we could propose or dumb down how even though we believe it's not really risky at all. Some of the clients that we talk to, or potential clients we talk to, just don't understand the idea of staking at all. And from their end, like legal staking is something like just bombing their, detonating their minds. So we were thinking about like, hey, like can Gauntlet like introduce or propose or write down like some sort of dumb down material to the potential institutional clients, saying that DBT could be used to minimize or mitigate the risks that are involved in the staking, so that you can just safely stake with multiple or very few number of, I mean, DBT is not going to do that, but few number of operators that are at the professional level, and also very curated operator sets that provides those very specific staking products. Once addressed during the dinner, it was never made into a business idea, so I can't really say it. I think those were the ideas that I also presented to certain life insurance companies and certain bigger LP type of or fund of funds type of players. Whenever I had meeting with principal managers, I always brought up hey, there's an idea called staking, and that's what we do. That's job. And if you're too worried, we can also implement the idea of DBT. And if you're worried about just using one single operator in Korea, like if we want, we could add players one from North America, one from Europe, one from Latin America, or another one from Southeast Asia, and then create a cluster and then do a single product. Was one of the ideas that you suggested, or that could be a global dispersed operator sets. Another idea was more of top operator sets, P2P, A41, yada yada. I don't want to name others, but so composed four and then presented as a financial product could be one of the ways that I actually were proposing this idea in earlier days of 2024. Nothing was made into a concrete business idea, but I think if we were to advertise, I think as a node operator, that would be way ahead for how we are going to sales with DBT, assuming DBT will go away.
I think that's a very good summary as well. This is, we don't speak for P2P obviously, but that is also the angle that we wanted to look into as well, which is that there are some this and there that we need to figure out in terms of as we just went through insurance, who's liable for it, or how do we actually define the liabilities when there's something catastrophic happens. But yeah, this is definitely something that we would love to explore as well after the talk. And I guess we don't have much time. I think we'll just ask one last question and sum it up. And I think there's a lot of questions that I would like to ask, and I guess audience would like to know, but I think we have the paradigm upgrade soon. So I think this really affects on how values work, right? Because the 32B thing would be not removed, but at least different. And with DBT, I think that would allow more decentralization while probably bring down the numbers of validators. What do you guys think about it? I think that would be the last question.
Yeah, so there's two big things happening in Pectra that will affect like all staking solutions. So one is triggerable exits. It's basically the ability for the execution layer to trigger the exit of a validator on the consensus layer through like a special message, which wasn't possible before. It's very important from a security perspective of protocols, especially when you have permissionless entry elements, like you would like even Rocket Pool or we will with CSM to prevent like problem of freeloading operators or malicious operators or things like that. And the other thing is what you mentioned, which is basically the proposed change to the maximum effective balance of the validator. So the idea is that currently the minimum and the maximum value of a validator are 32 ETH, but the minimum will become 32, and then 2048 will be the maximum. So the main purpose of this, as you mentioned, is to try to consolidate the number of active validators on the network, because right now they're creating too much burden on the peer-to-peer network. And so it'll decrease latency, it'll decrease the amount of actors on the network, and it'll allow the Ethereum developers to work on stuff like single slot finality and things like that. From a node operator perspective and from a staking protocol perspective, to be honest, it's pretty scary, because previously you might have like one validator that'll get slashed and it's just 32 ETH, and now you have a validator of 2048 ETH that might get slashed. And I think that's been taken into account, and so like the slashing mechanics, or at least the curve, is something that has been discussed to potentially be altered as a part of Pectra. It's not fully finalized yet exactly. And DVT can actually help here because it reduces the likelihood of a slashing happening, right? So if you have one operator making one mistake, then a slashing can happen. If you have one operator making one mistake in a DVT cluster of like 4 or 5 or 7, that mistake cannot lead to a slashing. Unless the DVT software isn't like correctly written, and we've seen something on testnet, not in Opal or SSV, where something like that has happened. So DVT can definitely help something like that. On the other hand, I think we will see actually less savings on cost from node operators than we would expect. And like, why will this happen? So you're thinking, I'm running, let's say 100 validators right now on an instance of 32, I'll just run 100 validators of 2048. Well, you're not going to do that, or I'll get really mad at you, because that's a lot more like ETH at stake if something happens to that machine. Like if that machine goes offline, and previously you had 100 times 32 ETH worth of value on that, like that is literally like 64 times lower than if you had $100 of 2048 ETH on there. So node operators do sizing of clusters based on what we call like blast radius minimization. If something blows up, how do you limit the impact? So while we will reduce the total amount of validators on the network, we will actually increase the amount of nodes on the network, because you will need to be running more beacon nodes and execution layer nodes with more clients, because now you're going to be running like more validator clients, but less validators. So that's something like an interesting side effect of this push. In general, it's not bad for the network to have more nodes, but you will have more busyness, I guess, and congestion on the beacon node side and on the execution layer side now, and that's something that will be really interesting to monitor to see how it affects network dynamics.
I'll try to keep it short. I'm pretty sure our CTO is listening to our panel, and I'm pretty confident that the whole tech team is actually preparing for Pectra. I'll speak a little bit from a different angle here. Like usually I do a lot of treasury management these days and just focus on like investment, like these type of like organization these days, organization stuff. So like on Pectra, I'll be honest, like I'm not too like deeply in this is my CTO's job, but there are two things like that I see from an operator's like leads perspective. Like whenever there is like a huge upgrade that is announced, there are two things that just follow it naturally too. One is like it's definitely going to get delayed, so it's going to give us ample time to prepare. The second thing is like it's usually like the consequences or the consequences of the upgrade will be addressed at the very last place, like at the very last minute of the upgrade. So like it will give us like the mind share of everybody, because we rarely do it together, right? I mean, in the usual business phrase, we rarely talk about those kind of stuff. We just meet and we say hi, I love you, like. But like when those times come, we actually do start talking about that, like as a whole, like group of collective mind, like all these like very separated operators, at least. So I'm expecting like there will be a breakthrough on all these kinds of big issues. Even the collateral coming from 30 to 50 classes is something that's like something that we're like not so sure. To be honest, like, we feel like the number could be adjusted. We'll see.
If you wanted to get adjusted, start writing on the research forums now.
I mean, at these forums is too diversified, and too many strands of the discussions we don't want to be part of it. But I think we'll definitely like participate.
Liking the attitude and liking how we could just kind of look into these aspects in the collective mind. That's the spirit of it. And okay, so I guess our time is due. Do we have any like closing notes?
I think we will have like a bunch of like staking, liquid staking, liquid restaking, and panels on and on and on. I hope like I think we should probably give the turn to others. I mean, you guys will probably include one, I don't know, but.
And I guess we could wrap it up. And thank you so much.